All right, so welcome to our second lecture, World Music, Music of North India. Up here on our first slide, we have Ravi Shankar and his daughter Anushka Shankar, Nora Jones' sister. Right? I think we mentioned that in an earlier class. And today, we're all going to become rasikas. Right? So people who are knowledgeable about music, and in fact, this entire course has been about that. So hopefully now when you go out into the world and you hear some world music, you're going to know about how it works and some subtleties of this music. All right, so the Indian subcontinent. So just we're really clear about where we are today. So we have Africa, the Far East, Indian subcontinent there in blue, okay, right next to the Middle East. As we know from our earlier class, there are two major kinds of music within this system. We have the Hindustani and we have the Carnatic. Right? So we talked about Carnatic earlier, and today with Will, we're going to spend some time with the Hindustani. So here we have a map that gives us a better idea of what we're referring to. Right? So we're up here in this area with a lot of Islamic influence. So even though we call it Hindu-Stani, right, most of the Hindu religion is down in the southern part of the country. Right? This is a more Islamic region, or a more Islamic influence in the music and in life in general there. Right, so some of the major religions that have been founded in India: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Right? Currently, the second largest religion in India is Islam. Okay? So Hinduism is the major religion. Right? And they have a pantheon of gods. Buddhism, we all know something about Buddhism because of its influence on the West, and we've been discussing Japan as well, which has a strong Buddhist influence. Right? Jainism is an interesting one. It's very similar to Buddhism. It's a lot about equality of all life forms and equality in life. Okay? And Sikhism, there are a lot of Sikhs in California as well. Right? And another religion that is very similar to Jainism. All right, it's all the same music. When the British were in India, when they had colonized India, they talked about the music as all sounding the same. Now, this was really due to the fact that the British didn't understand what was going on. Right? They didn't understand the subtleties of this music. We see down here at the bottom that Indian music has a tradition of over 3,000 years. Right? How long is our tradition in Western music? What do we think of our earliest Western music? What do you think? You're in music history class, so where did we start? What's the earliest music there? We started with Gregorian chant, right? So we have like 1,000 years of music tradition if we really kind of stretch it out. So 1,000 compared to 3,000. We're really musical babies in comparison to what they're able to do, all right? So we have really only two types of scales that we use in Western music. We use the major and the minor, mostly. Now there are modes, and there's jazz modes and things of that sort. But Indian music uses up to 500 different raga scales. All right? So again, a much broader spectrum. And some of these ragas will have references to things like time of day or a season. Right? So they'll have very specific kind of uses or attributes to them. A little more about raga scale. So if you think of the octave as being the light spectrum, the musical notes would be like the colors in the spectrum. The ragas would be like color schemes. By restricting yourself to only a few of all the colors in the spectrum, you get a ready-made theme to work with. Right? So in the Western system, we have how many notes in our octave? We have 12. Okay? And what's our smallest interval within that octave? What do we use? It's a half step, right? So with Indian music, we're also going to have much smaller things: microtones, quarter tones, eighth tones, bending of pitches. All right, so it gives you a much wider spectrum of sounds to use. All right. So raga scale. So raga. How is raga different than raga scale? And we'll expound on this a little bit more a little later in class. He knows more than I do on this. So a raga has rules that specify which notes are used in ascent and which are used in descent, down to the level of microtones. There are also norms as to how the notes in the raga are combined and how they relate to each other. So this is going to dictate how you improvise on this particular raga. Okay? Tala. Right? So the conceptual system in Indian thought that ranges from the time it takes to puncture a lotus petal with a pin. Right? That's your shortest amount of time. Longest amount of time are ages that are comparable to geologic time periods and encompass millions of years. Right? So then we need to narrow that down to something that we can use in music. So musicians are thinking in pulse. Right? So what is pulse? If we're thinking about pulse. As opposed to, say, meter. Good? So we have a beat going, and then that beat, we're not necessarily metering that beat yet, but it's something even, right? Moving through time is our pulse. Okay? And then they're going to think in groupings or additive meters. Somebody give me a definition of additive meters. Additive meters. And I know you guys know this, but we're all going to be quiet. Because the camera's on again. And we don't respond when the camera's on. Additive meter? Come on, my jazz guys, you know. Go. Silence. Okay. Additive meter. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2. Something of that nature. Okay? We're taking different meters and grouping them together to make some sort of a larger meter form. Right? Indian music is a classical art music that has many similarities to Western classical music. Right? So it appeals to and is patronized by an educated segment of the population. It has a complex body of theory and a formal system of study, and it is disseminated through public concerts in which there is an expected program order. Right? Right? But there's also some significant differences besides the way it sounds. Right? So pieces are mixed, pre-composed, and improvised material. Right? If you go to hear the LA Phil play, how much improvisation do you hear? Not necessarily zero, it depends on what piece is being done, but very little, right? You might get a cadenza if you go and you hear a Mozart piano concerto, right? They might play a little improvised section near the end of each movement called that cadenza. Often, though, even that isn't improvised anymore. So you will have written that down earlier, or you play one written by a master teacher, or you play one of Mozart's, right? But that's a spot where you get to improvise in classical music, right? All right, so in Indian music, there are different levels of improvisation that occur at specific points in a piece. Right? And a performer's skill is measured by the ability to improvise. Right? So if you're a jazz musician, yes, then your stature within that music is based upon your ability to improvise, right? Not so much in classical music. Our job as classical musicians, my job as a classical oboist, is to play what's on the page exactly, right? And don't deviate. Keep that rhythm exact. Unless, again, I'm playing that cadenza, or if I'm playing Baroque music, sometimes I get to improvise within Baroque music as well. Layers of musical activity. Now, we all know this one now, yes? Most of us do. Some of us had a little bit of trouble with that question. But we have melody, shruti, or the drone, and the rhythm. Right? So some of us had a little bit of trouble earlier in the class. We were wanting to put sitar in something besides melody. But sitar is definitely a melody instrument, as we're going to find out here today. Okay? Doesn't mean that they don't play within a rhythm or they can't play drone material, but its major role is there. Right? And we have the instruments down here. There is sitar. Right? We don't have tempura today, but we'll have a box going, so you'll hear that sound at least. Right? And rhythm set by the tabla, and we do have tabla today. All right, so you get to hear those, and will show you how they work then as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the form of the pieces. Western and Indian form, just to give you a little bit of reference. So one of the forms we talked about earlier in Western music is sonata allegro form. All right, so if we look at that, we have, first thing we're going to hear is the exposition. Then within that exposition, we have a couple of themes and a bridge and a closing theme. Then we have a development. Right? What happens in that development? Anything. Good. You take your themes, you develop them, you create something with that, right? Then we have our recapitulation. What happens in the recapitulation? What is a recap? Good. So the same material comes back and we hear it again, right? And then we have a coda at the end That's the ending material, something new that's telling us, okay, now this piece is over. Right? What does that look like to you? You have an exposition, a development, a recapitulation, and then something at the end. Another form that we use, say in your English class. One more time. It looks like an essay form. Okay, good. So this would be the way you would take an idea and develop it and present it in your English class. Same idea. Okay, now over to the Indian side. Now we have some words here that maybe we don't know. Some of them we do from previous class, but let's attach some meaning to those. We have alap, we have jor, gat vilambit, and gat drut. Okay? And these are the sections of the piece that are going to make it so it makes sense to us. All right? So the alap begins a performance of a long raga. The soloist is accompanied only by the tampura. Tampura has what role again? What is it doing within that ensemble? The drone. Good. So tampura is setting the drone for us. It's a free-ranging exploration of the raga without keeping a regular pulse. Okay, so you're not going to be able to hold that pulse in there. The job at that point is to lay out the raga for you, to explore the raga. Okay? Right? The tempo starts out broadly and increases in a series of plateaux until the intensity precipitates the introduction of a pulse. So it's going to get intense enough that the tabla player has to come in, and you hear that pulse going, and we move on to the next section. And this is where the performer earns their reputation. Right? So, that person really understands the raga. They can really improvise that alap. Right? It's very beautiful. Jor. The jor is pulsed improvisation. The tempo and rhythmic density increases during the jor. So here we might actually hear some rhythm. We're generally not going to hear the tabla come in, but we're going to hear some pulse beginning. This may be the easiest section. I need to change the spelling on that. This may be the easiest section for us as beginners to understand, as it is the most melodic with catchy tunes and rhythms. Right, then we move on to the second half of the form. The gat vilambit and the gat drut. The section of Hindustani instrumental music performance where the tabla begins. So this is where the tabla is going to come in. We're going to hear the rhythm begin to set. And so we immediately know, here we are in the section. Okay? The gat is generally a short composed melody. So it's something that's going to come back. We're going to recognize this melody returning. Maybe in Western music we would call it our theme. Right? So that first theme to come back in. The gat vilambit, the tabla enters at a slow to medium pace. And that pace is going to pick up as we move through the rest of the composition. In gat drut, the pace can increase exponentially. It can get very, very, very fast. As we were listening to some tabla players when we did South Indian, some of that very, very fast playing. Right? This is where the soloist shows their ability to improvise at extreme speeds and interact in complex ways with the tabla player. So they're going to pass ideas back and forth. Sometimes the tala, right? And the tala is going to be the rhythm, right? Will change, but of course the raga is going to stay the same all the way through the piece. The raga won't change. Roots of Indian music, right? So in the Vedas, a corpus of text originating in ancient India, the oldest scriptural texts in Hinduism, right? And so these are often chanted. And where else do we hear chanting? What other religions do we hear chanting and that we've listened to in this class? One we mentioned at the beginning of class today, in fact. So Christianity, right, where we have the Gregorian chants, right? Anything else? Islamic chant, good. So they're chanting scriptures again, all right? So something that happens in all the monotheistic religions. There's chanting of the texts. Okay, musical texture then. One more time to make sure that we have this, that we have the melodic layer, the shruti, which is also the what layer? The drone layer, good, or the rhythm and percussion layer. And our last slide here. This is a photograph of Bismillah Khan. He's a Shnai player. Right? Looks like an oboe. And he said, "My music is like an ocean and I am still standing on the shore." Right? So this music is incredibly complex. Takes a lifetime to study. He died quite recently. And his point being that even at the end of his life, at 80 years of playing this music, that he is only beginning to really understand it, right? So for us, myself included, we're just barely kind of dipping our toes into some of these ideas. Right? So at this point, I'd love to introduce Mr. Will Marsh. Will is a graduate of CalArts, also where he studied North Indian music, and is now an active sitar player within Los Angeles. He's now out on the west side. So he does concerts and plays for yoga classes and teaches sitar lessons and all of that. So we'll make sure that you guys have a list of upcoming concerts. He has that one we were talking about on the 31st. And so you can get out there and hear him play it. So I'll turn it over to Will.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Sherman.
You're welcome.
All right. Okay. So I became exposed to the sitar and Indian music at CalArts when I went there for my undergraduate degree. And I had background in guitar. Oh yeah, go ahead. And I took a class on the guitar. I was in an ensemble, and just being exposed to this music it really captured me, the improvisation, the intensity of the training, and so I became very serious, and then now today I'm performing and teaching Indian music. And one thing I want to go into now is kind of the history of, you guys looked at South Indian music, and North and South, there's a different sound, different influences. The thing about North Indian music is we had the influence from Persia, present-day Iran, which back then was the Persian Empire, a very sophisticated culture with arts and sciences, and that music came and mixed with indigenous Indian music. And to me, that mixture has led to one of the most fascinating, complex styles of music. And this is a traditional instrument from Iran. This is called setar, not sitar, setar. Se meaning three in Arabic and Farsi. And so this sitar here has evolved over many, many years. This could have been one of the earlier versions of this instrument, and I'll just play the sound of this. So, setar, Persian classical music. And I like to really heavily stress how rich music culture is in this part of the world. You have Persia, and then you have North India, you have South India, you have the Middle East, you have Turkish, Egyptian, so it's very important. Sometimes I have gigs where people will be like, oh yeah, I want some Middle Eastern sounds, and they'll hire me as a sitar player, and of course I'm happy to take the gig, but it's important to know that there's a lot of richness in this part of the world. So anyways, the Persian influence came around the 1300s. They brought the king set up shop, and then they kind of mixed with the Indian musicians that were already there. One of the great musicians from Turkey was quoted saying, "Indian music, the fire that burns heart and soul, is superior to the music of any other country." And this was an outsider coming and expressing that sentiment. So now I'm going to talk about my instrument, the sitar. And it evolved. The veena is did you talk about veena in South Indian music?
We may have just briefly.
Briefly. It's one of the old stringed instruments from India, and before it did not have all of these extra strings here that we'll talk about. So this current evolution of the sitar probably reached this point around 1750 or so. That's the first written music of this current shape of sitar. And now let's go into how this is built, talk about this instrument. So this bottom half is a hollow gourd. It's actually like a pumpkin that they dry out. Attached to this gourd is another piece of wood. It's called teak wood, an Indian teak wood. And this wood is much heavier, like a mahogany. And so we have two types of wood. And then all of these frets on the sitar are hand-tied with threads. And that is because the frets are all movable. If I want a different scale, I will move some frets. The octave is not completely, we only have 7 notes in between the octave at one time, so I will move a fret for a specific raga in the middle of a piece. After I finish one piece, I may have to move a fret for the next raga if it's different. And then, so there's 19 strings on this instrument. And let's talk about how these are all used and how they all flow together. The upper tier of the strings, all here, these are the strings that I actually strike when I'm playing. Pick. And then the right hand, this is my pick. It's called mizrab, and it's painful to wear. If you want to see after, I have a very large callus, and I always wear gloves when I do dishes because if it gets wet, I have to rebuild the callus, etc. So these main strings, these are my main playing strings. And most of the playing on the sitar is done actually on one string. So it's a very linear instrument. It's not like guitar where we're building complex chords or piano where we're showing lots of harmony. The sitar is mainly one string. And so this is my sitting position here. Takes a little time just to get used to that. So my main string, most of my development is done on this string. Also, this lower string, this is my lowest string. I will use this at some points. And then up here, there's 4 more strings. And these are tuned to like an open triad of the key I'm playing in. The sitar is now tuned to D, open D tuning. So this would be F sharp, A, D, D. D, F sharp, A, D, D. And then the highest string is the 4th, G. So you'll hear as I start to demo and play more, these strings will be used as just kind of, just to kind of fill space, like, and fill the drone space. So. And then there'll also be a point where I use these very rhythmically exclusively. So this is the main upper portion of the strings. And then the complexity in sitar really comes in with all of these extra strings. There's 12 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And so this is really where the magic of the sitar is. All of these strings are tuned to the scale that I'm going to play. So these strings all resonate. They're not struck, but they resonate because of the physics of them being hit up here, and I'll demonstrate. That's with that extra string. Here's it without. So this is really where sitar has a lot of magic to it, is when all these strings are tuned properly, the whole instrument, almost every string on the instrument will be resonating, even though I'm mainly playing on one. So these are called tarif, and then these are my upper main strings. And one of the big challenges of learning the sitar is really learning how to tune it properly. It takes a few years to actually be able to tune the instrument, and that's one of the biggest signs of someone who they're just not going to sound very good if their instrument isn't tuned properly. So even becoming a player that can tune your instrument perfectly is quite a feat. And one more thing about the physics of this instrument. This bridge is made out of, nowadays it's made out of a synthetic plastic, but it used to be a bone from a stag, a deer. And it's not just a flat bridge that the string rides over. There's a special shape that is slightly curved that gives it the right sound. And it's actually a really complex science of how you file and how you see what the proper angle is. And I personally I can't do it. Most sitar players can't do it. In India, we have someone come and they do everything they do all the maintenance. They come for a whole day and just work on them. Changing strings is pretty tedious on this instrument. So the maintenance is difficult. Being in America, I can't go to a sitar shop and drop this off and have it all done. There's very few people that know the work, so I'm working on learning it myself. And I'll also note that the frets, so they will get loose sometimes, and we have to hand tie those. And the strings are actually piano wire. We order them from Germany, and that's how we get our strings, is we order piano wire.
So Will, when you change raga, how long would it take you to reset? I guess it depends on how far the raga is away from the previous one, but you have to retune the whole instrument when you go to a new raga. Yeah.
There will inevitably be some notes that will be the same. It maybe take 3-4 minutes. So yeah, I'll play, I might have a gig where I need to play music for 2 hours. I'll play one rag, maybe after 20 minutes I feel like I want to change, then I just start changing accordingly. And then sometimes I specifically map it so that I go from rags that aren't too far off. And that's part of the skill as a performer, is knowing how to navigate between ragas and not get lost tuning for a half an hour in your performance. I want to ask if there's any questions about the construction of the instrument before I kind of keep moving on. I don't know how easy it is to see, but a lot of times people will be very mystified when I'm performing. And good. So now I'm going to demonstrate some of the main techniques of the sitar, just basic techniques before we get into detail of raga, how the instrument's played, what some of the motions are. And before I do that, I didn't bring an actual tampura. A tampura is the drone instrument. It's similar to sitar. It's a hollow gourd, and the strings are only played open to give that drone. So nowadays, there's an app that people use. It's found its way onto stages and big performances because the tampura is very big, and if you're touring, you're paying an extra fee. So if you have it on your iPhone, there you go. So this is the sound of tampura. And the sitar right now is tuned to D. Here's a D. D, D, A, F sharp, D. So most sitars are going to be tuned to C sharp or D. And that's purely because the string mechanics, the physics of the string, the sound is best there. If you're at C, it's a little too loose, and if you go above D, then the tension's too tight. So let's say I've tuned. Now I'm ready to play my instrument. And so there's two aspects that are happening, my right hand and my left hand. The right hand, we have the mizrab, and there's mainly 2 strokes that we use. Coming towards me, we call that da, and going away, we call that Ra. So in the beginning, when I'm training a student, I have them get comfortable. Da, Ra, da, Ra, da, Ra, da, Ra, da, 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 da. And then from those two strokes, we do a lot of complex things. That's all just based on Da and Ra, adding more complexity to it. So this is our right hand. Left hand, we're mainly using only the first two fingers on sitar because we're not creating chords, we're going in a linear fashion. This is an oil that I use so I can have easier motion. Okay, so let's say I'm going to play a major scale on sitar. You can see the motion. I'm using my first finger all the way up until I end, and then I'm using second finger and coming down. So. So that's my basic way of navigating around the sitar. And then one of the most complex expressive elements of sitar is the bending. Some Indian instruments, like the sarod, like the sarangi, these are fretless instruments. The sitar, we have frets, but the way that we express the singing-like quality is through bending. So everything I just played there was from one fret. And I'm able to basically sing, or like I was playing a fretless instrument, by bending. And that's really the essence of being a good sitar player, is being able to express that singing quality. And a lot of people will pick up a sitar and they'll, I can play this, it's like guitar, but until you start to explore the bending and start practicing those techniques, that's where the instrument really comes to life. So basic bending exercise, just one note. I'm bending to the next note in a major scale. And this is also painful and very challenging on the hand. If you look at a sitar player's hand, and they're usually swollen and very large callus. Sometimes you bleed. It's just part of the instrument. And then, so we have bending. An even more extended technique of that is a special aspect called the gamak. Gamak is, I'll do it for you. It's a very kind of expressive way of showing kind of microtones and bends in a musical phrase. you know. Now with gamak, you hear that roundness. It's not just that's straight. Now the gamak, this is something you can only learn from a teacher sitting there, yelling at you when you're out of tune, and that you can't write that down, That's, in Indian music, we don't really use notation much, and that's one of the main reasons why. I want to talk a little bit about just the training in the music, how we study, how we learn, what it's like to learn from an Indian teacher. It's a very intense musical tradition, right? Like Western classical, where you'll practice 12 hours a day in your early days. And like I just mentioned, notation is not a big part of Indian music. We have developed a way to kind of shorthand things just so you can remember a phrase or a few ideas, but most of this music is not at all written down. And the kind of terminology for this tradition is called Guru Shishya Parampara. And that basically means guru-student relationship is how the music is taught. So in the old days, you would live with your teacher. Your training would usually be about 8 to 10 years, and your practice sessions would be 10, 12 hours a day. So this is a very intense, rigorous tradition. And I think it's important to express that in those early years, a student you're not allowed to improvise. You play scales for maybe 4 or 5 years. Your teacher will just make you play scales, and he'll make you have a perfect, clear sound, and you'll just be slammed just practicing these exercises, sitting like this for 10 hours a day. And then slowly he'll start to show you compositions and train you to be a full performer of the music. It started to change now. My teacher, I didn't meet him in India. I went to college and I was the student paying for school. So he still had some of that element, but eventually it's like we're learning ragas and complex material that when he was young, it took him 10 years before his teacher started to share that with him. So I'm kind of fascinated how it's starting to shift, and how the point of kind of grace period of what you have to go through is kind of becoming much smaller nowadays. In Indian tradition, the guru is a very, very sacred person. It literally means one who gives light, guru. So in this tradition, you will never question your guru. You will never criticize. You will never express disappointment or frustration. You will not, say, "Oh, Guruji, why are we doing this again? We did this last week." I mean, you would get the out of you if you brought that up in traditional India. So it's fascinating because, in one hand, it has allowed this music that's 3,000 years old to keep. It's maintained its identity. So that intensity has allowed the music to maintain its shape. Whereas in the West, we kind of have the opposite approach, where it's about the individual and what can I create that's new and that's mine and that's original. India, very different. It's about how can I express this timeless tradition in a way that is unique to me, but still within the tradition. The intensity, the 12-hour practice sessions, this really attracted me about the music, a culture that takes such a respect for the art form of music, that they give it this much attention, this much focus, this much care.
So Will, are you still studying with your same teacher?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I did live in Colorado for some time, and I studied with a sitar player from India there, so I do like to visit him as well. Traditionally, you have only one guru until he dies. Nowadays, it's becoming a little more loose because, people move nowadays. It's not as, I'm not living with my teacher. It's a little more loose. So I feel very lucky that I've got to study with two master musicians, because it's given me a diversity and a richness that has brought my playing to a higher level. But that, I'm glad you asked, because traditionally you have one guru, and if you leave your guru, generally it's like you're calling for bad things, or it's like a curse, will come upon you. So the music is not written down. So Indian musicians, their memories are very sophisticated, very advanced. We memorize hours and hours and hours of material. You'll see that when I demonstrate tabla, this is all in the memory. I want to tell a couple stories about the training. Physical abuse has been a part of it. There's stories when Ravi Shankar went to first study, and he went back to his room and he was practicing something that he wasn't supposed to practice. His guru came and stormed in, smashed his sitar. This is the intensity of the guru and how you don't want to mess with his authority. So Ravi Shankar, a lot of you are familiar with him, very famous sitar player, his daughter Anushka, his daughter Nora Jones. I'm learning from the family that taught him. So my teacher is the grandson of Ravi Shankar's teacher. I feel very blessed to be a part of this tradition, and it's very ironic how, this intense musical family is relocated to California. They're not in India, they're here. So that's a sign of the times too, how the music is becoming more globalized.
For those of you who don't remember Ravi Shankar, so he was the sitar teacher for the Beatles, and George Harrison and such.
Yes, and that's was
the connection there.
One of the biggest exposures of Indian music to the West was through Ravi Shankar and his collaboration with the Beatles. So now I'm going to go a little deeper into raga. Raga is our main musical structure melodically in Indian music. And there's a translation for raga which I really like, and it is this. Raga is that which colors the mind. So the raga is actually, in India, we think of it as almost like a person or an entity or like a being that we're, as the performer, we're trying to bring it to life. We're trying to show this character through music. So as Dr. Sherman expressed, it's more than a scale. It's more complex than that. It's not just up and down a series of notes. However, every raga will have its ascending pattern and descending pattern. Sometimes it may be the same, sometimes it may be different. And the raga, every raga has a time of day or a season. For example, a rainy season raga can be played any time during the rainy season. In India, rainy season, the musicians at the concerts will be performing these. If it rains here, my teacher might start teaching us a monsoon raga.
So not very often then.
Yeah, it's tough to learn those here. That's a quality that a lot of people have not been exposed to in the West, thinking of, this, it would not be proper to perform a morning raga at an 8 p.m. concert. It would just not be right.
So do you mix those then too? Is there a summer raga that's done in the morning, or is it season or time of day?
It's generally season or time. The seasonal ones are any time during the season, okay. And the time of day is usually with 3-hour blocks. So I'm actually going to demonstrate an evening raga, just because I like to share this one.
We'll pretend
it's evening
later.
Somewhere in the world, right? That's what I always say. It's somewhere. It's evening.
It's evening on the East Coast.
Well, it's interesting as a performer because, I have to practice. If I have a show, usually they're evening shows, and if my practice time's in the morning, I can't be so strict about it that I can only practice a rag at the time. And I've asked my teachers about that, and they say, well, it's okay, do what you have to do. But it's interesting, and the way that I've heard it is I've played a rehearsal for a teacher. It's an evening rag, it's the middle of the day. They say, okay, good job, work on this, work on that, and they'll say, but this will be more alive in the evening. So it's just this idea that the raga kind of comes to life more in the time that it's allotted for. And then a little bit about the tuning, okay? You guys, if you play a piano, it's tuned to a system called equal temperament. And that is a system so that it allows every half step and every whole step is the same ratio, the same amount of sense, so that I can transpose from C major to A flat major, and it will still be the same ratio. Without going too deep into all this tuning, Indian music is based on a system that's more just intonation. That word just intonation means more of the perfect ratios. So in this tampura, in this drone, there's many overtones happening. We're hearing the third, we're hearing the fifth, the minor seventh is all within this drone. And one way to think about the tuning in Indian music is that's how we're tuning our instrument, is to the overtones from the tampura. So that's a major third. Do, mi in solfege, right? Do, re, mi, do, mi. So this, on a piano, it would be here. On the sitar, it's here. So this is some subtle aspect of tuning that, if you're curious, look into it. Most of the world's music is not tuned in equal temperament. So that's something to think about, knowing that there's an infinite amount of sound, and every culture uses, a different scale.
Even in Western music, in orchestra and such, we don't really play an equal temperament. If you play with a piano, then you have to play an equal temperament. But if it's an instrument that's not fretted, then we'll go for those pure thirds and fifths and octaves also. It just sounds better. Piano is really actually it's a compromise where everything is out of tune instead of some things being really out of tune. Everything's a little bit out of tune. Yeah.
So one last aspect of the raga is the ras. The ras is the emotions. At the beginning, Dr. Sherman showed the quote, the rasika is someone who appreciates sound. That comes from the same word of, the belief that this music has the power to ignite our emotions and give us life and give us, it's a spiritual tool. It's a richness to life. So some of the common emotions that may be found in a raga could be the bhakti ras, which is devotion, Shringar, joy and love, Karun, which is pathos and compassion, Shanti, which is peace. So in a rag, there might be 2 or 3 emotions that are the main ones, and our teachers might tell us, this rag is full of Shanti, which is peace, etc. So that is another layer of raga. So this rag I'm going to share with you, this is called Rag Yemen. And this is an evening raga. It's often one of the first ragas that students learn. And Let me just play the ascent and the descent, and then I'll explain. So right there, I just played up and down of the raga. So the way up is not like a straight scale. So here we're getting into the subtleties, the fine tuning, the fine points of a raga. Ni re ga, ga ma pa, pa ma ga re sa. So these little things I'm singing are just kind of rough outlines of the raga. It's hard to talk about raga. It's much easier to just play raga. So as long as I want to make sure to express that you hear on the way up I'm skipping a few notes. I'm going 7 to 2. This would be C sharp to E. I'm not going, I'm going. And then the way down, I play every note in the scale. Sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, re, sa. So this raga is almost a major scale, except that we're using a sharp fourth. So it could be compared to a Lydian mode. This note, sharp fourth. So this is the basic idea of a raga, is that we have our group of notes, we have the way that we use them up and the way that we use them down. And it gets even more advanced, but the real way that a performer knows the raga is he memorizes many, many compositions. He sits with his teacher for hours. You know, one raga, you might spend a year on one raga, a few years on your first raga. So this is Rag Yemen, and I want to kind of demo a few of the sections of the music now. Now that we've talked enough, let's hear some music. So the first part, alap, this is like a meditation, like a prayer. It's only the sitar and the tampura. And this is really the hardest part of the music that for the performer, because we don't have rhythm to rely on, we don't have the tabla player to join us. It's only us and the music. And this music, you cannot make a mistake. You can't play out of tune. So we're improvising, and we're just trying to slowly bring this raga to life and show its color. And this can go on for 30 minutes, for 40 minutes, 10 minutes. You know, a very skilled performer can do a long alap. Right now, I just want to play maybe 4 or 5 minutes of alap, and I want you to really kind of be attentive to the tuning, my intonation, the subtleties, and just kind of please soak in this music and the feeling of it, because there's nothing really comparable to alap in any other music. So this is just a little taste of that. Thanks. So alap continues on, and then the jor. The jor is, rhythm is shown, but it's not with a tabla. So the jor could just be. Please clap. Show this pulse. So this will gradually keep speeding up, and this is a chance for the soloist to just kind of explore rhythmic ideas before we get to the tabla. Jala can either be the instrument solo, or it'll often be with the tabla as well at the very end. And it's a very fast section. I'll play that. So, Jala, fast, and we're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So this is like a climax, you know, this is like running. So, I want to make sure I get over to the tabla before we need to finish. So this is the main percussive accompanying instrument in North Indian music. It evolved from an instrument that was one piece, like a barrel, and played with two hands. And the saying is that someone cut it in half, and then they had tabla. So I'm going to give a basic description here. This is our bass. We call this baya. And this is our treble, the tabla. And this drum is a tuned drum. So we have a hammer, and this tension of the head with these strings allows us to get a different pitch. So right now this drum is tuned. If I hit the head, it'll become sharper. If I strike it upwards, it will become flatter. So a tabla player, they have to know how to tune their drum, and in the beginning of the performance, they'll also be tuning. So tabla, the real unique thing about this rhythmic part of Indian music is the fact that you can say everything before you play it. Dhati da terikita taka terikita dhati da getuna kena. So I'm not an excellent tabla player, but that's the idea. So this rhythm is also a cyclical music. So we're talking about cycles, like same thing in African music, a repeating rhythmic cycle. I think what I want to do is have you guys clapping a rhythmic cycle while I play a melody on the sitar. So one of the main rhythmic cycles in Indian music is a 16-beat cycle. And I'm going to show this to you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a wave. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now's the wave. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1. Dha, din, din, da, na, tin, tin, na, tete, din, din, da, dha, din, din, da, dha, din, din, da, na, tin, tin, na, tete, din, din, da, dha, din, din, da, dha, din, din, da, na, tin, tin, na, tete, din, din, da. Keep going. So what I'm doing is this is my rhythmic cycle that I'm improvising over. So traditionally in a performance, I'd be here, I'd have a tabla player, and that's how we'd perform, is he would be playing that rhythmic cycle, da, din, din, and I would have my melody that fits over that rhythmic cycle, and we trade ideas back and forth. This is the gut. Ga re ga mama papa mama re re sa za ga re ni ni re ga ga re ga, mama papa mama re re sa sa ga re ni re ga. So when I play that, the tabla player can solo because I'm showing that cycle that allows us to be on the same page. So that's how we improvise when we get to that section. This would be called drutgat, is the tabla player is playing that rhythm, and then I'm free to just explore ideas, try out different things. Yeah. And there's an aspect we call tihai, which is a phrase of 3 that comes back to the first beat. So, da din din da da din din da 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 da. Let me think of one. Da din din da da ti da ga da ti da ga da ti da ga da din din na din din da ti da ga da ti da ga da ti da ga da din din na din din da ga terikir da ga terikir da ga terikir da din. So this is like it's like a cadence, like a rhythmic cadence, something
like a hemiola in Western music.
Yeah.
Kind of 3 against 2 going on a bit. Okay.
Yeah. So this is another aspect of the music that you'll hear in performance.
The tihai, is it always there, or is it more towards the end of it? Or?
Tihai can happen in the slow speed as well.
Any place.
Anywhere where there needs to be a rhythmic cycle for tihai to happen.
Okay.
So jor, you won't hear tihai, but in any gat you may.
And the gat is that's the melody, that's a memorized fixed melody.
Yes.
And then you improvise around.
Exactly.
So while you're doing gat, then the tabla player might be improvising.
Yes.
And then switch back, and he's playing the tala, and you would improvise on the gat then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so the gat is one of the few parts that is purely composed and fixed in the music, is that gat. So that's, and then we practice, we call them tan, are phrases that are exercises that fit with the tala and find us a way back. So I have composed ones. Da din. Can you clap for me, guys? Da din din da da din din da din din na da da din din. So. That was a composed tan or idea taught to me by a teacher that I just played, and I practice these constantly because they fuel my imagination and my ability to improvise.
You know, the gat are set by teachers. They're traditional melodies. You're not writing gat in your.
I have some that I have written, but almost all of them are traditional.
And so they'll come. A certain raga will have a set of gat that goes with that raga.
Yeah, and there are many gats.
Okay.
Many different talas.
Right. So if you have 500 talas, and then you have a bunch of gat for each tala, then you.
Yes.
That's where a lot of memorization comes in.
Yes.
Right then. Okay.
And you hear the ones that are the most common that kind of keep popping up with little variations. So yeah, every performer will have their handful of gats in particular ragas that they're comfortable and that they like to perform. So one more thing about the rhythm. Odd rhythms are very common in Indian music. Odd cycles, odd meters. Just let's find an example of one to express. 7 beats. 3 plus 4. Tin, tin, na, din, na, din, na. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Tin, tin, na, din, na, din, na, na, tin, tin, na, din, na, din, na, na, tin, tin, na, din, na, din, na. So we'll improvise over 7-beat cycle, 10-beat cycle, 10 and a quarter. I mean, they're very vast in the rhythmic complexity. And the beauty of rhythm in Indian music is that I really see it as more of shapes. It's three-dimensional. It's not like a straight line. It's shapes. And, you know, I've really struggled with math until I started learning Indian rhythm. I started making my own equations to write my music. So there's an element of just a complexity and a poetry, you know. Dhati da terikita taka terikita dhati dage tuna kena tati da terikita taka terikita dhati dage dina gena. It's like a poem. It's like a rhythmic poetry. And to me, that richness, I learned tabla, I know tabla. I'm not a performer on tabla, but the sitar and the tabla player, they know each other's worlds. They play together. They both feed off of that, each other's discipline. So
when you're singing the rhythms, then that's the tabla rhythms, and there's a set of syllables for every different sound you can get in the tabla. And then when you're singing melody, then it's the sa re ga ma pa, where you're actually singing like we sing solfege.
Yes.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You're singing the pitches then.
Correct. I can sing any raga I play. I can sing using my sargam, which is like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
So you've always got two systems going in your head.
So it's very strongly emphasizing that oral tradition. You know, this going back 3,000 years ago, it was probably at a form where mostly was chanting scripture. They started adding some melodic variation. You know, they used to chant stories to the rhythm. So, dha gena ga takita gena would be like Brahma Saraswati. They would have these stories that they told within the rhythm. So now it's evolved to an artistic music tradition. Very fascinating. And any questions where we've gone so far? I really want to try to express, you know, if you guys are listening to Indian music, I want you to have some framework as to what's going on. A lot of people, if you're not familiar with it and you can't connect to it, it's harder to appreciate it. So, you know, if you're listening, do some YouTube, Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar Khan, these guys, and try to appreciate I love the long form of Indian music, that one raga could be an hour long. My concert, the first piece is usually 45, 50 minutes. So I just love that quality of a music that allows you to just dig deep and express and improvise and start off slow and gradually climax with an ending T-high. You know, we get there from so this full spectrum is a very beautiful quality.
Yeah, so it takes a certain amount of commitment to sit down and listen to.
It takes.
It's like listening to even a Western symphony, a Bruckner symphony that's an hour and a half long.
And that's what really makes this an artistic classical tradition is, you know, I can't play this music in a loud bar. I can't really play it anywhere where there's a lot of distraction going on because myself as a performer, I have to be able to be in a certain state of mind to play a 40-minute alap. I could play it on the sidewalk, but it might not be as good as if I was in a room where people were listening and appreciating. So that, you know, that's an interesting, as we're getting to concluding is, you know, how is this music taking shape now? It's finding much appreciation in the West, which is very refreshing. I've never been to India yet. I'm planning my trip, but the fact that, you know, me being from a little town in Michigan and coming across this music, and now I'm performing, I'm teaching professionally, it says a lot about how this music has survived for many thousands of years and is continuing to travel and to spread and flourish. And especially in the Western audiences. In India, this music is like classical music here, you know. People aren't flocking to go see chamber music or orchestra, but there is still the support. There's still a small, but it's not the masses, you know. If you go to India, a lot of Indians don't know much about their classical music. I'm constantly explaining it to them, which in the beginning kind of threw me off, but then I realized that, you know, this is an artistic music tradition. It's not a popular music. The same it is, you know, anybody from America is not going to know things about Bach or Western classical, so that same concept.
Except at Glendale, where we all know about Western classical music. We take a music appreciation, right?
Yeah. And I hope that I've kind of been able to give you guys a more hands-on taste of what this music is like, what it's about, what it sounds like. If there's no questions.
We're being shy out there. Anybody have a question?
Yes.
I'll be a little stereotypical. When you ever listen to the Beatles or George Harrison or anything like this, do you actually ever try to do covers of their music using sitar or anything like that, or do you do covers of other contemporary or more, you know, recent material and then using your method of playing?
What I like to do is I like to play sitar in settings of other styles of music. For example, like playing sitar with a reggae group. You know, like I like to keep, to me, the melodic depth of raga allows me, like I can play with any musician on sitar because I can improvise, I can hear what they're doing. I did a recording session with Little Richard's bass player and you know, they loved it. Like, so I'm more about not so much covering music on sitar, but taking sitar in its beauty and its quality into other music styles. I'll play Norwegian wood sometimes. People want to hear it, but it's not really where I put my energy is in covers. Anybody else? Yes.
Is there like a certain form of a sitar playing where it's like slow and then progressively it gets faster?
Yeah, in the music itself, we start off slow. We start off with alap, and then like I showed you at the end, we get to the jala. So traditional Indian music, we have that where we start slow and then we climax to fast. So check out, you know, a YouTube video of a classical sitar performance, and you'll get a taste of where it begins and then where it ends. And it really helps to have the tabla there because that gives it the energy. So, yeah.
There's one posted for you on the Moodle site. It's a short one. It's only 20 minutes that goes through the entire cycle. So make sure you've listened to that. Okay?
Any more questions?
We don't have a sitar player next week, so it's your one chance. He won't be in your math class next year, so. Nothing else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Good deal. So if you were shy on the camera and you want to come up and talk to Will now, feel free to do that.
So just making the tune takes some time.
There's two?
Yeah, these are, so this one is here. This one is here. And then the strings are tied on. See there? Yeah. So we take a coil of the wire, we cut it, and then we do it all by hand.